All right, the next visit we're going to look at is Cecilio Dimas, who is teaching in 7th and 8th grade. His lesson is on comparing linear functions. Now if we click here, this is again a public lesson that he developed with his colleagues Sally Kais and Kamaljeet Sangha, who work with him at his school. And basically this scenario here is asking students to evaluate different DVD plans and which one is most valuable and at what point do they all really end up being the same, if ever. So this was done with an original pre-assessment task with the Mars task Gym. It's also drawn from one called Picking Apples. And interestingly, I want to reinforce that these tasks were originally developed for different grade levels, but he's drawing them together for the developmental age and mathematical advancement of his students in 7th and 8th grade. So here's Picking Apples, here's Gym, and if we click here to the lesson planning, again, parts A and B of the planning, you can see the three colleagues talking together about this lesson and talking about how to teach students really to use those tables and graphs to represent information accurately and then to be able to evaluate the different, once you've set it up accurately, how do you evaluate the sense at which they coincide over time. So one of the things that becomes apparent, and again, over time, is that the students sometimes are putting data in the wrong place, which then ends up propagating throughout the model. So again in here we have all of these different student samples, right? So in this case it's Gym, there are different membership options and so on, paying $50 a month and $2 each time you work out, pay $5 each time you work out, or $100 per month for unlimited use. Very similar scenario to the one set up with the DVD plans. So you can look through all of these 5 sets of work samples as well as the lesson plan, for example, for this entire lesson. You can see all the people who were involved in the development of this lesson. They have their rationale, they have all of the different parts of the lesson design, what's the process, what are these student goals. For my use, I could imagine even with pre-service teacher candidates using this as a model of collaborative lesson planning and saying, okay, what are those goals? What's the teacher research question? What's the rationale? What's the math? What's hard about that? What's the sequence of the lesson? And so on. I think that there's a lot of ways in which these resources can be used for different opportunities for teacher learning. Certainly for in-service practicing teachers, that's one real natural connection. If you teach at a similar age, similar grade level to Cecilio, you can take this and apply it perhaps directly into your classroom. But if you teach younger students or older students, or if you're preparing to teach students, you could think about different scenarios in which you could use this. Some of this also you can see the model in which he has students work. There's cover sheets, there are these prompts for the follow-up, different tabular representations. There's all kinds of teaching materials here. As we go through the lesson, you can see how Cecilio introduces this lesson. He's constantly circulating among the students in the classroom. Like some of the other lessons, we see some really excellent examples of differentiation. So as you go through in this discussion and the students are comparing their perspectives on the scenario, you see that the students actually have very different levels of sophistication in their understanding. And so by calling attention to this, you can kind of see how he is differentiating his lesson as he goes. Also right here, you can't see her very well behind the arrow, but if I were to play this video, you would see that this is his principal who is observing this lesson as well. So it's a nice example of engaged administrative leadership as well. As you go through, again, part 2, it's a different scenario. Problem 2, he closes the lesson. This is, a middle school setting, so the students have fairly compressed hours of instruction, and so unlike, say, the elementary school setting where the teachers can, follow an interesting thing that the students bring up, because they've got a little bit more control over the school day. That's not the case here. So he closes it. It sets them up to go to their next period. Again, there's a student debrief here where he's talking about the students, about their level of understanding, as well as the faculty debrief. involving not only the teachers who are engaged in the planning, but the principal as well. I want to remind you that actually when you go up to Tools for Educators, the Tours of Inside Mathematics, if you go into the school principals section, you can see a longer conversation with Deb Negretti, who is Cecilio Dimas' principal. So if you want to get a sense of what's the relationship between his teaching and his school setting, that's a really nice connection to be able to make. So we'll go back to the classroom visits, and we will move on to the next teacher.